All right. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Major Barnett. How are you?
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Gotta unmute my speaker just a second. It was off. All right, there we go. Should be able to hear you now.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. No, thanks for coming on time. Did you guys all get a chance to see the keynote online or not?
No, sir, I did not.
Oh. Yeah, it was quite interesting. He was talking about rockets and the new engine designs and stuff like that for the future. So that was kind of interesting. I didn't get to see the whole thing though, because I had to come back and test the new rooms now that we've kind of had all this chaos happen with Zoom.
Yeah.
So what we're gonna do is, so you'll start during your session window. You'll present your information. So I have everything recording too, so that way we can compile these later. We'll probably end up making some sort of library really that we're going to keep open that people can go back and like look at and watch these recordings. So hopefully that's kind of a new aspect that we'll see how that goes. Kind of depends on how difficult that's going to be after this. But you'll have your 15-minute window to do your talk. If it doesn't take that long, that's fine. And then of course we'll open up to Q&A for anybody in the session room, and that's about it. That's all there is to it.
Sweet.
So, and then we'll just kind of save questions maybe till the end, and yeah, look forward to hearing everybody's presentation. So,
Cool.
Olivia, I think you're up first.
I am, yeah.
So if you're ready to go, you can get your presentation loaded and take over and
Sweet.
introduce everything and go from there.
Should I wait till 1300 to begin?
Yeah, we'll
Okay.
start. Yeah, go ahead and just once you're queued up and ready to go, we'll just start at 1 exactly, in case that way when more people jump in, from the other schools or whatnot.
Can you guys see that?
I can see that.
Presentation? Sweet.
Mhm.
Okay, cool.
Of course, during the presentation, like I guess I probably should have mentioned that people can just ask questions in the chat room. If you listen in the chat room, that's fine. But if you need verbal Q&A stuff, we'll wait till the end. Okay. Olivia, whenever you're ready to begin.
Okay, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm going to be talking about some research I did last summer for Cadet Summer Research Program with Dr. Ryan Burke in the Military and Strategic Studies Department. And basically what we were looking at is kind of setting up a quantifiable system that can propose how much value each area of responsibility has. So I'll get more into that, but basically we created a strategic value proposition. We're trying to look at redefining 21st century defense priority assessments. Okay, overview. So we were like, how does the U.S. measure strategic value in certain areas of responsibility, as I talked about before? So I went in and basically we were using the DIME spectrum to find parameters that we could quantify and then use to represent all AORs in general, so that we could figure out, okay, how much is this AOR worth versus this one? I'll get more into that later. Basically, we propose this SVP system as a better way to figure out where we should strategically rebalance as a nation, and how can the SVP help the United States maybe gain buy-in, political will, and the ability to actually quantify where we need certain assets and when, and whether or not one region is of more value or not. So we took a look at the 2015 NSS, where President Obama had a lot of just random facts that he used to kind of back up why the Asia Pacific was important. But the 4 foundational pillars of pursuit for that NSS was security, prosperity, values, and international order. And President Obama talks a lot about how we should be welcoming the rise of a prosperous China, and kind of working on establishing diplomatic relations, security, and development for democracy in the region. And one of the largest reasons for President Obama was that 25% of the global GDP resides in the Asia Pacific. So obviously GDP is a very large factor. There have been a lot of scholars that have since then come forward and said maybe it's not the only thing that we should be worrying about, but that's why we wanted to take a little bit more of a deeper look into the value of a region based on things that were actually quantifiable other than just GDP. So 2017 NSS with President Trump, the 4 pillars were promote American prosperity, peace, preserve peace through strength and advance American influence, and protect the homeland. And basically with the continued CENTCOM drawdown, we took 2 regions. We took the Arctic and we took CENTCOM. The Arctic has been looked at through a lot of research, basically in terms of militarization on China and Russia's end, and also expansion on China and Russia's end, especially with the Polar Silk Road proposition that China has come up with for their Belt and Road Initiative. So there's a lot of stuff going on up there, and we took that region, and basically the countries that we looked at, we also pulled in countries from the Antarctic Treaty and the Arctic Council. And then we also included China as an observer of the Arctic Council. And then we got into all those parameters for all of those countries. And then we took CENTCOM AOR and all the countries involved in that region, and we compared the 2 of them based on the strategic value proposition. So there's been basically, in sum, we're trying to quantify those regions so that we can kind of give them a score in terms of their value to the United States as a strategic region in terms of global stability, economic stability, informational stability, and military stability. So we use the DIME spectrum. For the diplomatic value proposition, we use alliances, democracy index, embassies and consulates, and the fragility index. And then for informational, we use the free press index, literacy rate, percent population with secondary education, and we use percent internet users. For the military value proposition, we use nuclear capability, U.S. military personnel in country, global peace index, and the proximity to the US. And then for economic value proposition, we use gross domestic product, economic freedom index, resource rents as percent GDP, and total labor force. And that all tied into the strategic value proposition when you create that final number of that final score for that AOR. So this is kind of how it works with weightings. So the diplomatic value proposition had its 4 parameters that we gave it. And we basically went through and we said, okay, which parameter is going to be the most important for this region overall? And that one got 40% weight when it came to forming that diplomatic value proposition. Parameter 2 was given 30% weight. Parameter 3 was given 20% weight, and parameter 4 was given 10% weight. And then you just go and repeat it for informational, military, and economic, and that would give you your strategic value proposition. So when we compared the 2 regions, the Arctic and Antarctic ended up scoring higher than CENTCOM AOR based on the parameters that we used. This isn't obviously total because there's a lot of other factors that you should be considering, but it is kind of pointing in the direction of like, this is a theory that we have that we think can work pretty well in terms of helping the United States figure out, okay, what is strategically valuable and maybe what do we need in certain AORs instead of just sending everything, and trying to help us focus on multiple regions at once and not just like get tunnel vision and focus on one, because there may need to be assets and a lot of diplomatic efforts in several regions, not just a main primary focus of one. And basically, that gets us down to the strategic value proposition's value that it can provide. We think that it can increase political will, especially when it comes to the American people actually understanding why the United States is valuing certain regions and certain actions, and have the numbers to back that up. And then it helps us quantify regions and really show, okay, like maybe this region needs more diplomatic attention, maybe this region needs more military attention, and kind of help us focus in on like what we actually need to do in those regions. And then it increased understanding of assets that would be needed in the region. One of the things that Dr. Burke and I have discussed that we think the United States can do a little bit better is actually focusing in and looking at, okay, how many assets, what do we need and where? And this can kind of help us figure out maybe where to put more weight of effort in certain areas than others. And then, yeah, last bullet kind of sums that up also. So that is my research. And if you guys have any questions, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, I mean, I have a question just to start it off.
Yeah.
You said that you weighted the parameters for particular regions.
Mm-hmm.
How, and you said parameter 1 had like the most weight to it.
Yeah.
Is that like what is deemed to be the most valuable thing with that area?
So the way that we looked at it was kind of the one that might have the most influence on the area and might have the most influence based on America's strategic objectives that were outlined in the NSS. So that's how we kind of balance that. It's written, so we actually wrote an article on it, and it'll be a lot easier to see if you guys read the article, but a lot went into it and like our thought process. So it's really hard to sit here and explain from a bigger, broader picture. But the article will be published in OTH Over the Horizon, the multi-domain strategy journal, by probably next week. So if you want to look more into that, it kind of shows our thought process for why we ended up weighting certain ones where. But yeah, it was based on like parameter 1 would get that weighting because we felt that it was the most influential for like US strategic objectives, along with how much it affects the country's stability.
Yeah. Very interesting. Okay, well, that's the question that I had. Anybody else? I'm guessing no. Okay, Olivia, well, thank you so much. It was awesome.
Thank you, I
Look
appreciate
forward to reading that journal. I'll have to look for it.
Thank you, sir, I appreciate it.
Well, Zach, I think you're up next.
Yes, sir.
I think. Let me check. I'm pretty sure you were up next.
Yes, sir, I think so. Do you want me to get started now or wait?
Well, if you're ready to go, I mean, we can push through these. You know, no sense in waiting if everyone's done and asked all their questions. I think we can, if you're ready.
Okay, sounds good, sir. Sure, the slides up.
Yes, they are. I can see them.
Awesome.
To medical care.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm CUNC Zachary Flash. I'm a FAST MSS major and a pre-med, so I'll be going to medical school in the fall. And the title of this presentation is Role 2 Medical Care and the U.S. Military, Information Leads to Saving Lives. So a quick disclaimer, these views or any views in the presentation are my own and that of my team and not necessarily the official policy or position of any of those official agencies or government organizations listed or any not listed. So I'll start off by giving you some background information about this project. Then we'll go through the process of creating after action reports for these Role 2 medical teams, and finally go through some initial results and analysis of those results. So for the first part of this, the driving force is this quote from Peter Drucker. He says, "You can't improve what you can't measure." Essentially, exactly the same as the title of this presentation. You have to measure what you're doing in order to figure out what you can improve on, what you can do better, and in this case, that you can save more lives. So why this project? So this project comes from the DoD Inspector General. This report was 2020-087, Audit of Training of Mobile Medical Teams in the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command and U.S. Africa Command Areas of Responsibility. And essentially, what this report goes into is it talks about how it wanted to audit and determine whether Defense Health Agency and military departments provided effective training to mobile medical teams to improve trauma care before teams deployed to these two areas of responsibility. For our purposes of this project, we did expand it out to all AORs and all Role 2 medical teams across the DoD. And for this, we're going to be defining mobile medical teams as small mobile groups of medical personnel, 10 people or less, operating at the tactical or intra-theater level. And this comes from that report, and it's what we used for this project and this presentation. So what did this report recommend? So they had two main recommendations. So the first one, as you can see there, was that the Joint Trauma Education and Training Branch Chief of the Joint Trauma System continue efforts to complete and implement standardized medical training. And the second one is that this report recommended that the Joint Trauma System Chief and Joint Trauma System Performance Improvement Branch Chief develop a standardized post-deployment after-action report template to gather information on the effectiveness of training provided to mobile medical team members. We're going to focus on this second recommendation here. The first recommendation was tackled by another team at the Joint Trauma System, so we took over the second one. So this report identified three challenges that currently exist in the current structure. The first one is training standardization. So there's little guidance on what is required and what is completed before a team deploys, when it deploys, during its deployment, etc. And also there's a lack of feedback on the applicability and usefulness of this completed training. So again, this first challenge was really tackled by the Role 2 Readiness Report project. I'll get into it a little bit later, but that was another team at the Joint Trauma System. The second one was reporting standardization. There's currently a lack of standardization in the reporting of this training and how things are going throughout a deployment. So while after-action report documentation occurs, it tends to lack important details because there is not a standardized format for it. There's not a standardized process for this as well. And then the Joint Lessons Learned Information System, or JLIS, is currently underutilized. The information is not being put into it effectively, and it's not being analyzed from that effectively. And finally, there's massive variability in staffing and equipping of these teams. So this is from Joint Pub 4-02. It's the Joint Health Services publication for the DoD. And you'll see that there's the 4 different roles of care on the left side, and across the top, you'll see the 4 different branches here. Of course, Space Force is lacking, as this is all before the Space Force was brought into existence. And what I want you to focus on is in the Role 2 area. If you look at, let's say, the Navy, for example, there's 4 different descriptions or 4 different Role 2 teams that exist in that one branch. For the Air Force, we're a little better. We only have 2. But even then, inside of each branch, you can see there's massive variability of these teams. What this slide is showing is around 8 to 10 different Role 2 teams or austere resuscitative teams, same thing, interchangeable here, and how different they are. So you can look at the variability in the manning. So you have teams with as low as 3 people and as high as 10. You can look at, on the far right side, the operation room capacity. You have from 0 all the way to 2. So this is massive variability in the capabilities of these, and especially this middle category, the personnel, how different it is for each team. So what's the challenge? Why did this project, come to be? So the DoD lacks a standardized process to collect, evaluate, remediate, or disseminate opportunities, issues, best practices, or lessons for austere surgical teams, so Role 2 teams, upon completion of missions. And this is through after-action reports. So what do we do? This project was initiated by the DoD Inspector General and then passed on to the Joint Trauma System Performance Improvement Branch. And they reached out to us, we reached out to them, some connections are made through various USAFA connections to them. And there was 3 of us from USAFA that participated. So Second Lieutenant Zachary Bailey, he graduated in 2020, myself, and then C1C Cameron Mathis. So the 3 of us worked on this with the Joint Trauma System to essentially just jumpstart this project, get it off the ground. And what we did is we took pre-existing questions, we quality checked them, put them in a standardized format, inputted them into IntelLink, which is a government survey platform for secure data at the unclass level. And we piloted this with redeploying Role 2 teams, and finally assisted with the creation of data visualization through Tableau. It's a super cool interface. It connects directly with IntelLink, and I'll get into that a little more. So what you're looking at here is an example of an after-action report. You'll see it has various categories of questions, and then inside of each category, it has the questions, and it dives into more specifics. And the most important thing here is that these use the .mil PFP categories. The .mil PFP is doctrine, organization, training, material, leadership, personnel, facilities, and policy. And what this does, it allows for the data to be better analyzed in the end because it's in these clear categories. You can say, hey, look, 15 teams had this problem with doctrine, we need to fix that. Or 5 teams had a personnel issue. So it allows it to be very easily analyzed. And this is something that didn't exist before this project. What you're looking at here is the Tableau interface. This is, of course, all fake data that we made up just to practice with the data visualization system. And you'll see it's color coded, it has graphs, it has charts. It's very easy to read, very easy to understand. And same thing here with Tableau. You'll see it's, again, very clear, very organized by the questions, and very easy to analyze in the end. So where are we now? So as I said, there were multiple parts to this project, and we just had one little part in this. So there was 3 main parts. There's the pre-hospital after-action reports, or role of care area, the Role 2, and then the Role 2 and 3. So again, we're focusing on this one here in the blue, the Role 2 post-deployment after-action report. Of course, this is post-deployment. It's based on the teams, and it's currently being piloted by the 555th FRST. So getting into the data analysis and the initial results. So this has a second driving force here, again, from Peter Drucker. He says the relevant question is not simply what shall we do tomorrow, but rather what shall we do today in order to get ready for tomorrow? Again, this is about improving medical care in deployed environments and all around the world. And essentially, if you don't have data, you don't know what you need to improve on. So for the initial results, we looked at 14 historic AARs received between 2003 and 2020. Of course, we couldn't use the ones that were that the data was coming from our specific after-action reports, and that's just because they're currently being piloted. So we looked at historic data instead. We had 11 that were from 2018 to 2020. So only 3 of them were, out of date, if you want to put it that way, whereas 11 of them were very recent. And there were 238 results used to identify these common themes. And we had 4 common themes here. So the first one is the importance of medical imaging. And you'll see that there were 3 that talked about this, and that is 1.3% of the entire the data set for this team, and 21% of the teams talked about this. So 3% of the data encompassed talked about medical imaging, and 3 of the teams talked about this. Lack of standardized training, 33 mentions across 7 teams. Confusion surrounding documentation, 15 mentions across 3 teams. And with clarifying the responsibility of Role 2 teams, which is in my mind the most important one, even though the data doesn't show this, there were 10 mentions across 3 teams. So getting into the importance of medical imaging. So this is one that wasn't really mentioned in the initial DoD Inspector General report, but it did come up pretty often in the results. So the first idea here is this balancing the need of imaging and portability or mobility of the imaging device. And specifically 3 things: ultrasound, X-ray machines, and computerized technology machines. So CT scans, so the last one there. We have a couple of proposed solutions for how to solve this going forward. Essentially, the first one, and the big idea here, is to establish joint standards for required imaging for teams. So saying, hey, if you're deployed to this area of responsibility, you need this imaging. If you're deployed to this one, you only need this. And ensuring that it's standardized across the board and that these teams are easily understood of what capabilities they have. Second thing we found was a lack of standardized training for these teams. So the big issue here is there's a lack of standardized minimum training for what the teams need to go through on a team basis and also an individual basis. There is a lack of value of cross-training right now. Cross-training is so valuable for these teams. If we take, let's say, an emergency physician and give him or her training in anesthesia, now they can supplement if their anesthesiologist isn't present or is occupied with another patient. Very important there. There needs to be specialized training for deployments. A big example here is this last point here is CBRNE. That's not training that's really given to the medical personnel before they go, unless they go to very specific regions that we expect it to occur. Whereas this needs to be something that happens across all areas of responsibilities and for all deployments. A couple of proposed solutions here. The first one is to standardize minimum pre-deployment training and to track its completion. This training must be tracked, and that's going to be through the Role 2 readiness assessment, which is another project that the Joint Trauma System took on. And what we recommend here is that the Joint Trauma System Joint Trauma Education Training branch need to take this on and create a core training that then the military services can implement across their branch and mandate completion and then track. And we need to allow for team and mission specific additions to the core. So I think of this as similar to USAFA. You have your core curriculum that everyone needs, and then you have your majors courses or your specifics that you need before you go to a AOR or a deployment. There's massive confusion surrounding the documentation and the documentation procedures. So there's a lack of adherence to the standardized system for recording, collecting, and transferring medical data. And this is mainly because the teams lack the capabilities to do this. A lot of teams talked about how they don't have cell phones or computers or internet access to be able to document this in an electronic format. And of course, a paper format's more difficult to keep track of when there's so many things going on in a deployed environment. There's also a lack of resources for this purpose in some deployed environments. And what needs to happen is we need to ensure that there's a standardized format, a standardized method for doing this, and that the resources for documenting are provided to the teams in a simple way that can work with or without access to internet. So for solutions, ensure that there's proper training and documentation procedures and standards. There has to be training behind it. Then we have to enforce these documentation procedures and standards. If there's no enforcement of this, then there's no real incentive for the teams to continue to do this on top of everything else they're doing in a deployed environment. And finally, feedback has to be provided to the stakeholders on the quality of the documentation. Constructive criticism needs to be given so the teams can improve and the people can improve on what they're doing and ensure that they're giving the best documentation possible. So last one, and again, as I said, I feel that this is the most important thing, is we need to better clarify the responsibilities of the Role 2 teams. So what you'll see here is 2 quotes from, again, Joint Prop 4-02, the Joint Health Services. And I want to highlight the first one being a light maneuver team. This is described as having advanced resuscitation procedures up to damage control surgery. And for enhanced, the second type of Role 2 teams, it'll have basic secondary healthcare built around primary surgery, intensive care unit, ward beds, limited X-ray, laboratory, and dental support. So if you look at this, we classify both of these as Role 2 teams, yet their capabilities are on essentially opposite ends of the spectrum. You go to one, where the best thing you're going to get is resuscitative damage control surgery. And you go to enhanced, and now we have all the way up to dental support. Very different things. And this is an issue. It should be pretty obvious why. And it's because if you're in a deployed environment, and let's say you're in the Army, and you're expecting a enhanced Roll 2 team, but you end up just calling for a Roll 2 team and you end up getting a light maneuver, what you're going to get is obviously very different. And this can lead to people not being saved on the battlefield, to lives lost because of a miscommunication and a misdefinition of what a Roll 2 team is. So pretty simple proposed solution here. Redefine Roll 2 and adapt Joint Pub 4-02 to better represent the modern battlefield. And I'm happy to say that the Joint Trauma System is involved in the current policy updates surrounding this. So if you get nothing else from this, I want you to get these last 2 points. The first one is that standardized AAR collection enables identification of system-related and .mil PFP opportunities, issues, best practices, and lessons learned. And a robust performance improvement process to improve processes and share best practices and lessons will improve delivery of combat casualty care. Again, as the title of this presentation, the goal is to save more lives on the battlefield. And to do this, we need data to analyze and to improve across the board. The only way to do this is to have performance improvement through good documentation that's standardized and eventually input into JLIS, the Joint Lessons Learned Information System, and then created into actionable items that can be used across the DoD by the service chiefs. So that's all I have. I'll end the slideshow so I can see the Teams chat, and I'll take any questions you may have.
So the biggest concern is standardization. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yes, sir, essentially. There's just a lack of standardization across the board, across the DoD.
Yeah, I could see how the Roll 2 definitions could cause problems. That's interesting. But it sounds to me like they kind of have a simple fix for that. They're just going to change like the definitions.
Yes, sir. That's the gist of it, as I'm sure you know better than I do. Things like that are not exactly easily done in the U.S. military, so I don't expect that it's going to be a one word change and fix everything. But the hope is that it is that simple.
Yeah, that would be nice. But yeah, you're right. You see that a lot. It seems like there's a simple fix to some solutions that are out there, but oftentimes they're way more complicated, usually because they involve policy and strategy, and it has to go all the way up the chain of command.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I think the most difficult thing here is actually, something I learned through this process was how the Joint Trauma System, so it's out of San Antonio. They have the ability to set policy, but they can't enforce it. So they can say, hey, we would really like it if this happens, but the service chiefs have to be the ones to actually implement that. So that to me just, really shows how massive the bureaucracy is and how difficult it is to accomplish something that should be so simple.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know that. Well, great. That was an awesome presentation. Anybody else have any questions? I'm guessing that's a negative. All right. Well, thanks, Zach. What we'll do next is, I think, Kaylin, you're up.
Yes, sir.
So you can go ahead and get your stuff queued up and ready to go. But we'll take just like a 5-6 minute break. Use the restroom if you got to. We'll start at we'll say 1:35. That sound good, Kaylin?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool.
Are my slides up? For anybody who is here. Cool.
Okay, Kaylin, you can feel free to take it away whenever you're ready.
Awesome. Thank you so much, sir. So, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kaylin Harvey, and I'm a senior at USAFA, majoring in military strategic studies, working with Dr. Hunter. Today, I will be presenting on the DoD policy covering suicide prevention and what I believe needs to be changed in order to be more successful at preventing suicides in the military. Just to provide a quick overview at how this presentation will flow, I'll begin with my own personal experiences that have led me to develop a passion for the topic of suicide prevention before going into the current statistics that are out for military suicides. I will then dive into the current DoD suicide prevention policy, as well as what each branch is doing to be proactive against suicide and enact this policy. Following that, we'll take a look at the culture that has developed in the military and the stigma that has come out of this that has impacted service members seeking help. And then the next topic will be studies that popped up during my research that presented varying ideas and possible solutions. And then I'll round it out with my official proposal. So I grew up a military brat. My dad is enlisted in the Air Force. I have been surrounded by the military my entire life, both with its positives and its negatives. Growing up on AFN for my TV, I was always aware of suicide and the military through commercials and such that would pop up. As I got older and I began to become more interested in actually serving myself, my dad began having more open conversations with me, and I got to learn a lot more of the prevalent issue that suicide is, as well as kind of share his frustration that things don't seem to be improving that much. And even then, I never really understood until I actually came to USAFA. To be honest, I have struggled with depression for a while and eventually went to my commander about it my sophomore year. And he confessed that he had been aware for over the past year, but never really did anything about it. He then proceeded to avoid me for months, and when I hit a bad low, he had my command team punish me for not performing in a way that he thought would make his squadron look good. That's when I really knew that something was off, but the biggest push for me was the 2 deaths at USAFA last year for the class of 20. The rest of the wing had gone home, but I stayed behind because my parents were overseas, so we had to figure all of that out. And so sadly, I was here to see the fallout of the 2 deaths that were just 48 hours apart. After that second death, our previous superintendent had the class of 20 get on Teams. I went to a friend's room to watch it. And pretty much this general told us that we needed to learn to be stronger, which just did not sit right with me at all. That it appeared that a general was claiming that these 2 seniors were just too weak to make it. Anyone who knew both of these cadets would never describe them as weak or fragile or unresilient. And anyone who knows anybody who has died in a similar fashion would probably agree. You would never define these people as weak. And so it's with this knowledge about this perceived weakness, it's trying to understand why there's this assumption that you become weak in these moments before your death. And then based on that faulty assumption, why do we build a program around it without questioning why or tailoring it to make it better? And we really need to hit at the needs of our friends and our family members and our teammates. And so that is why I decided to make suicide prevention my capstone. To start, these are the statistics from last calendar year. And these figures have been pulled straight out of the Department of Defense's quarterly suicide reports. When I first started my research, I had only seen the first and second quarter and was under the impression that numbers were somewhat stabilized. However, we can see that there's a major jump for the third quarter, which I think is pretty concerning. I understand that it can be chalked up to COVID and people feeling isolated. However, my big issue is that I had to go out of my way to find this information. I heard nothing about it from any of my leadership, and yes, it could have come up in the resiliency talks that we have, but even then, it's been months since I've had one of those. And so I don't know if it was ever going to come up, no idea. So to me, this just kind of cements in my mind that there is an issue, because even if they found the cause to be COVID related due to regulations and isolation, why are we not doing more resiliency training or discussions to prevent us from feeling alone? So there is still some sort of disconnect that's happening here. This is a picture taken from the DoD Instruction 6490.16, Defense Suicide Prevention Program, which went into effect on the 6th of November of 2017 and was updated and re-released 15th of June of 2020. This is what is in the very beginning of the document and outlines the purpose of not only the rest of the document, but the goal of the DoD in regard to suicide prevention. Each branch takes a look at this and uses it as guidance to tailor their individual programs. I want to bring attention to the word resilience as something to keep in the back of the mind as this presentation continues. It'll pop up a lot, and it's going to be something that I'm definitely going to come back to. To look at how the individual branches are building suicide prevention programs, first one needs to see how each branch is impacted by suicide. This is a graph I found during my research. It was in an article published by Rajiv Ramchand called "The War Within: Preventing Suicide in the U.S. Military." Granted, this data is from over a decade ago. It could be seen that suicides for every branch was on the rise, which showed that, hey, we need to be paying attention to this. We need to kind of be putting more focus on this. And so since then, all the branches have taken this data and tried their best to make things better. So to start, the Army has since focused on training leaders of individual units on how to engage and remain involved with their soldiers, believing that a more present and engaged chain allows for soldiers to be more open and willing to receive help while also receiving resiliency training themselves. The Navy has taken an approach of emphasizing early intervention by helping to prevent and manage stress, and they have engaged actively on social media and training to help sailors learn the signs and ask for help. So their focus is that early intervention. The Marine Corps has focused mainly on the training for those who have direct contact with a large proportion of the force, such as drill instructors. While everyone still receives broad training, they're more focused on having subject matter experts. And then lastly, the Air Force has decided to approach suicide prevention through mainly the culture changes. All airmen have to receive training, not only in developing their own mental resilience, but also how to help others. The Air Force has even started a volunteer program called We Man Connect that focuses on teaching airmen to build skills and create strong social networks. Now with this, it definitely, the appearance is there that the 4 branches have begun to take a serious approach and put a lot of attention on suicide prevention. Even though, with all this happening, with branches and the DoD as a whole putting more effort into taking proactive measures to prevent suicides among its members, there remains a problem of culture. When one hears about the military, they imagine people who are strong, they're unbeatable, they're the best of the best. And while it is important for the military to have that image, that personality and mindset, we cannot let that overshadow the fact that the military is comprised of human beings. They endure a lot, and it is unreasonable to expect them to always be okay. I mean, I've seen it in my few years here at USAFA, where I've heard people in the beginning of their time here, they're very understanding about mental health, but then just a couple years later, their mindset has changed and they're very, well, maybe you just aren't cut out for the military. Maybe this just isn't the thing for you if you can't handle it. And then referring back to the prior superintendent, he essentially labeled those who tragically died as people who weren't strong enough to be here or serve. And because that is for sure how all of us took it when we heard it. I had a close friend of mine get kicked out because they determined she was mentally unfit to serve, when the big problem was she was outcasted by her squadron and her commander because she asked for help. And then she had no support structure to give her the chance to get better. They put her on high risk and then left her alone for 48 hours. No one checked on her. That doesn't make sense. And there was my own case with my commander in my first squadron, where he was more concerned with the appearance of his squadron over helping me get better. Because of this culture of having to be 100% all of the time, there's risen a stigma against receiving help. People are scared to reach out because they're worried of the consequences that will come with. There are people in command positions who, upon hearing that someone in their chain is struggling with mental health issues, they develop an opinion that maybe this person shouldn't be serving in the military because they're not cut out for this. They're not strong enough for it. And the DoD policy is kind of indirectly providing credibility to this opinion. So taking this, I have found 3 main topics throughout my research through 3 basically studies. And I will make a point that there are roughly only about 5 studies that are focused on the military suicide prevention programs, while there are countless on civilian side. And so a lot of my research has had to come from civilian programs. In one publication called Programs for Suicide Prevention, it was found that there are 3 different strategies for programs in regards to targeting an audience. It's universal, selective, and indicated. Universal focuses on the population as a whole, working through campaigns and awareness programs. Selective aims for at-risk groups and works through gatekeeper training and screening programs. Lastly, indicated hyper-focuses on those at high risk by using support groups in a variety of programs covering support training and referral sources. This study determined that not one alone is entirely effective. You have to take bits and pieces from each. However, the DoD, they take a largely universal approach. The entire squadron or unit receives some sort of training and or discussion about suicide prevention, the sources and how to help those around you. And by taking this wider approach, it does make it difficult to connect on a personal level. By addressing a group as a whole, someone may feel awkward coming forward, or it may even come across as disingenuous, as quite a few training sessions we've had here at USAFA, it comes across as just a box to check. Now, I understand why the DoD takes a universal approach. It's, you can't be spending countless hours working on this one-on-one because eventually it starts to impact the mission. You can't get things done. So it does make sense in that regard. Another study done in the civilian world was on the idea of mindfulness, which is defined as paying attention in a particular way on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. Essentially, it plays the role of a technique or a psychological process and outcome all in one. The purpose of this study was to see if mindfulness plays a role in resilience by incorporating it with psychologists and 2 suicidal clients. It was found that it actually helped the clients by teaching them self-compassion and building a better relationship between the client and their psychologist. Lastly, there was a study on expressive flexibility, which was determined to have a positive relationship with resilience. Expressive flexibility is essentially the ability to enhance and or suppress your emotions whenever it's appropriate. Throughout the study, it was seen that individuals who lacked a regulation in expressive flexibility were more prone to negative emotions, diminished rapport, and social interaction. This study involved a group of military college students, and one confessed limitation was that the cadets may have reported a higher resilience than they actually felt because they felt the pressure and need to do so considering the environment they're in. So, yet again, the stigma surrounding mental health appeared and could have kind of messed this up. So my proposal. I originally went into the capstone wanting to change the word resilience. It does nothing to help the stigma surrounding mental health as one hears it and immediately associates strength with it. However, I know it's kind of unreasonable for all because one USAFA kid thinks it should change that, the whole DoD is going to change the word. And so instead, I shifted my focus to adding 2 words with it, which may help to change how one sees and interprets the word resilience. The 2 words I would like to add are mindfulness and expressive flexibility. Mindfulness has already been shown to have a positive relationship with resiliency. Mindfulness-based interventions help to reduce anxiety and depression. Training centered on mindfulness can help to teach individuals to recognize their own patterns and state of being and develop a new perception on situations deemed threatful or triggering. By having mindfulness-centered training for service members, it can allow them to create an ability within themselves to help them get out of their own heads when a depressive or anxiety episode hits. It can also help to create a sympathetic part within themselves that can help others around them, as was seen in the study with the psychologist and the client. Expressive flexibility was also determined to have a positive relationship with resilience. If one is not taught how to properly and appropriately control their emotions, how can they perform and be at their best or most resilient? There's this idea in the military that falls under the same stigma as mental health that showing emotions is weak, especially when you're a leader or a commander. The problem that comes with this is by showing no emotion, you can come across as cool, cold, cruel, unapproachable. If you show too much emotion, you're seen as weak, soft, a burden. Considering all that service members do, especially when they're deployed and when they come back, it is unrealistic to expect them to keep their emotions to themselves, just as it is to blame them when they have a breakdown because they were unable to reach out or connect emotionally with anyone else. With the 2 studies showing that there are aspects of our emotions that play into the effectiveness of resilience, it does not make sense to only teach resilience. If you want those serving to be at their strongest and most resilient, you have to teach them mindfulness and expressive flexibility. To conclude, this is just a reminder of all that was discussed. Overall, do I think this will stop all these deaths? No. But do I think that if we work on mindfulness and being flexible with our emotions, we can make a dent in it? Yes. We're all in this together. When I look back at those who have died, I don't think it is appropriate to be told that they were weak and just couldn't hack it. It infuriates me to realize that this is what is going on either consciously or subconsciously. And I would hope that this is something that bothers everybody. And regardless of the words we use, we need to understand that our service members, they're not weak, they're a part of us, and we need to be mindful of that. And that wraps it up. I want to thank you if there are any questions.
I'm hoping somebody else has questions, but that was good. That was really good. Very mindful presentation. and it's really unfortunate that you experience some of those things in your career where you see people that come forward and express vulnerability because they're in those situations and then have negative things happen to them, just like you said, squadron commanders or commanders in general not treating their people fairly or maybe punishing them in some other way because they're not holding up to the standards, set forth for everybody else because they're having trouble, and I definitely agree it's a big culture change that we're trying to go through. I would be very curious to see, what people come up with to help improve that. Because you're right, it is lacking quite a bit still, and yeah, I think a lot of people just don't want to deal with it. I mean, other than changing policy to change the wording, what else do you think we could do to improve that mentality?
Throughout I conducted a few interviews, and there was one interview that I did with Dr. Kate Hendricks Thomas, and she brought up a very good point where she was trying to argue for kind of having little exercises that you have on a regular basis in a squadron, not like physical, but kind of somatic, where it kind of gets into your head that this isn't therapy or anything. This is training. This is normal. This is what we all do. Which I kind of agreed with that, because also that helps lower the stigma, because it's not, it's the one training session every 3 months. This is odd. This is an odd thing out. So I think if there are measures taken like that to where it starts to become a more part of your everyday life and just part of the work environment, then that'll help kind of that stigma go down, which then helps people kind of feel more comfortable asking for help.
Yeah, intriguing. Better than, say, doing like the annual awareness training type
Yes,
stuff.
sir.
Yeah. Wow, that's really good. Yeah. Hopefully we see improvements. I'm there with you. It's sad to see that sort of thing happen to people. And it's unfortunate when leadership, takes such a strong stance towards, what seems to be not supportive. And that's unfortunate. So hopefully we just continue to improve.
I really hope so.
Me too. That's really good. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Anybody else have questions? If nobody else does, then let's see who's up next. I think it's Jacob. Jacob, I think you and your team are up. Yeah, and Felicity and other Jacob. So if you want to start queuing up your guys' presentation, you can start, and we'll start in like 2 minutes, 5 till. We're a little early, but we'll get done.
Sounds good, sir. Thank you.
And wrap it up, yeah. Okay, well, I'll let you take it away, Jacob, whenever you're ready.
Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for being here and for listening to our sexual assault prevention presentation. I'm C2C Jacob Boone. And with me is Felicity Haran and Jake Vieira. It seems as though we are having just a little bit of difficulty with the slides. Sorry, give us just 1 second.
Yeah, that's okay. We have a few. We're kind of a few minutes ahead of schedule, so we can work out.
Okay, sorry about that. This should be good now.
Yeah, we go. Perfect. All right, so we'll start here. So first things first, this is our why we did our project. And as you can see from this quote, this is not a new issue, and there has been a zero tolerance policy since well before me and my team were actually born, and clearly it isn't working. As you will see, sexual assault affects the DoD at all levels and will ultimately affect you in some way. Whether you're a reserve Navy intelligence officer and senior policy advisor like Miss Andrea Goldstein, who was assaulted in the VA, or you're my friend Jordan here, who is a senior airman, sexual assault affects us at all levels. That being said, I'd like to share a personal story. Like I said, this is my friend Jordan. We grew up together in Massachusetts, and she was like a sister to me. At 18, she denied a full scholarship to Alabama so that she could join the Air Force. Like many airmen, it was the best decision she ever made. But unfortunately, by the end of her first year, she was sexually harassed by her coworkers. When she came forward about it, it took over a year for any action to be done, with countless times of her retelling her uncomfortable story. Fast forward 3 months after this, she was at work again where she was sexually harassed by her superior officer. And at this point, she had pretty much lost faith in the system and chose not to report. It wasn't until 3 other women from her unit actually came forward to her and shared this very similar story with this man that she decided to report. And once again, that process took months for her to see action. At this point, she'd become cynical of the Air Force. And as Jordan entered her 3rd year in the Air Force, she was again sexually harassed when another airman posted photos of her on a porn site. At this point, Jordan was so discouraged that she felt she had nowhere to go and went to mental health for help. A month later, she found out the Air Force was discharging her because of that. And this is unfortunately a story of many airmen in this Air Force. A story that begins with positivity and a future, only to be ruined by that same system which gave them that future. She wasn't discharged because of an injury or not meeting standards, but because of other members of this Air Force were tormenting her. It's not only the thousands of dollars, dozens of training hours, and personnel lost, but an airman with so much potential left behind in a force that promises to never leave a person behind. Unfortunately, Jordan is a textbook case of what happens to so many airmen, not to mention the hundreds of rape cases that occur each year. So this is our why, and this is why we must educate the Air Force, bring awareness, and ultimately change the culture behind sexual assault. And how do we change culture? That's by having conversation, and that starts in group-based discussion.
So after hearing multiple stories from victims like Jordan, the root problem that we are trying to solve is that the Air Force needs to improve the stigma behind reporting sexual assault cases, because sexual assault does not just affect one gender or age. It affects all Air Force members through gender, age, AFSC, rank, and sexual orientation. There has been an increasingly high rate of occurrence of sexual assault cases over the past couple years, and this not only affects the Air Force mission, it creates psychological damage that disrupts team cohesion and trust. There's also the problem of identifying the spectrum of behavior, which proves that sexual harassment is usually a precursor behavior leading to sexual assault. These two issues cannot be treated separately because sexual harassment prevention is sexual assault prevention.
We as airmen are a team, and we need to be able to trust each other in order to contribute towards the Air Force's readiness and lethality.
So how do we change culture? Basically, that starts by having conversation and not lecture. We need to normalize discussion and reporting in the same way that we do with suicide currently. And how do we know this? Well, we have some pretty textbook cases of change in culture with the Spread the Word to End the Word initiative and Daryl Davis, which I'll give a brief explanation about. So the Special Olympics Committee started a campaign in 2009 called Spread the Word to End the Word. And if you remember, a retard was commonly used with no regard for its true meaning. This campaign alone was able to change culture and perception of the word by creating conversation and using the slogan, Spread the Word to End the Word. Within 4 years, this movement was able to completely change the entire country's perspective on the word and of special needs people simply by having conversation and being audible about the idea and saying the slogan, Spread the Word to End the Word. And then Daryl Davis, on the other hand, is an African-American blues musician who single-handedly got over 200 KKK members to denounce the Klan. He did this by having conversation with these men and women. Most of them had never interacted with a black man, and by having conversation with them and erasing any ignorance, he was able to change the culture of hundreds of people. Just like the R word and racism, we can change culture by having conversation, removing ignorance, and making this conversation something common and comfortable to have. And this is what the basis of our sexual assault training should be. I can personally attest to the fact that I've become very comfortable about talking about suicide and mental health just because we have made such an upfront and almost comfortable thing to talk about. It has become much more of a norm at this point, and because of that, I've had vastly more conversations with people about it, and way more people I know have received help because of it. And we need to make sexual assault the same way.
All right, so we have 3 targets or centers of focus that we would like to work on with this project. The first one is improving culture around reporting. And so how do we see that? We see it by increasing the number of cases of factual reporting and also an increase in airmen receiving help or talking to peers about sexual assault. Like what Jake just said, we want to normalize people going to help for sexual assault and sexual harassment. We feel like there's a lot of attention placed on suicide right now, and we want to give some of that attention to sexual assault and sexual harassment and saying it is okay to go get help. The second thing we like to focus on is creating accountability. So we want to normalize discussion of sexual assault and then also increase in serious conversations rather than joking about the topic. And so even as cadets, we see that it is very normal for people to talk about or even joke about this topic. And I've done this before too, where I just let it slide. And that's just not something we need to do. We need to reduce the amount of joking that we have and actually place some seriousness into this topic. And then third is prioritizing health of survivor. And so that we see that by decrease in airman discharge after going through a sexual assault process, and then airman reporting if a repeated victim.
So before we get into the nitty gritty of our solution, we wanted to take you through our thought process and then some of our failed solutions so that you could see kind of what we've tried and what we're looking to in the future. So as Lean Six Sigma Green Belt, Felicity and I chose to use the design thinking method, an innovative technique introduced briefly in our Innovation and Future Conflict course under Lieutenant Colonel Costel and discussed in depth during our Lean Six Sigma course. Design thinking is a non-linear, iterative process that we use in order to understand the users, challenge assumptions, redefine problems, and create innovative solutions to prototype and test. After spending our first full month empathizing and defining the core issues of sexual assault, we began the iterative process of ideating and prototyping solutions by pitching them to senior Air Force members and sexual assault experts who helped us refine our ideas. Next slide, please. So we have had several failed prototypes in our process to create a good solution. And when asked how it felt to fail 10,000 times when attempting to create the light bulb, Thomas Edison replied with, "I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." In our effort to find solutions to the most prominent issues regarding sexual assault, we had many ideas, though most of which never came to fruition. Here are just a few. Our very first mistake occurred when we tried to define our problem. We failed to understand that the issue of sexual assault was a spectrum of behavior and often difficult to define or assign blame. This is an issue we cannot policy our way out of. That being said, here are just a few of the policy change prototypes we initially came up with in the process. First, we found the time a trial takes is one of the leading reasons people choose not to report. Shortening this time would incentivize reports and convictions, which would reduce cases. We discontinued this effort due to the time constraint and legal complexity of this issue. It was just too much for our group. Next, in an effort to prioritize victim health, we attempted to limit the number of times a victim had to recall their story, which currently sits between 6 and 8 times according to USAPA OSI agents. After speaking with sexual assault and prevention representatives, the JAGs here on base, and several OSI agents, we were advised that anything less than 6 to 7 times would greatly damage the capability of the prosecution team to collect information for the case. Next slide, please. Our next idea came from the logic that there is no better evidence than video evidence. In an effort to increase video evidence and create a deterrent, our idea was to install more cameras on base. Unfortunately, there are already many cameras up in workspaces, and the highest frequency locations for sexual assault are the base housing and off-base locations, which cameras were simply not feasible. Drawing from local law enforcement and the Department of Defense Special Operations community, we believe a psych evaluation was another good option to limit the number of serial offenders, which would make up the majority of sexual assault offenders. We were informed by staffers that a similar idea had already been pitched to the entire DoD around 2016, but was rejected due to the strong correlation of characteristics between the ideal trigger puller and serial sexual assault offenders. Additionally, the DoD is short-staffed, and further limiting force numbers would be a difficult pitch to senior leadership. Lastly, and debatably our best idea, was an Air Force-wide safe-to-report policy modeled after the current Air Force Academy policy, which creates immunity to victims for low-severity crimes when reporting sexual assault. This would prevent a victim from being charged with offenses such as underage drinking, dereliction of duty, fraternization. After much time refining and prototyping this idea, we reached out to Andrea Goldstein, who is a member of Congress, for feedback, who informed us that similar legislation was already making its way through the House. So we had to stop that idea. Next slide, please. So these running prototypes are promising solutions to issues we've seen related to sexual assault, but haven't had the time and resources to investigate further. First, while true numbers remain above our pay grade, OSI informed us that most sexual assaults occur in on-base housing, which sparked inspiration for several ideas, including a housing care facility and housing arrangement changes for restricted reports. Our first idea is to allow for a rapid change in housing location for restricted sexual assault reports. At this point, only unrestricted reports with a full investigation are allowed to change housing. This prioritizes health of survivors while maintaining a significant amount of anonymity. This would require a waiver and some legal coordination to maintain the report as restricted while still informing the commander. Our next prototype is borrowed from a running program at UC Berkeley, which offers a housing facility for students to stay at the night of an assault. It offers complimentary rooms, food, security, and access to healthcare professionals, yet maintains the students' anonymity. Similarly, we would like to stand up rooms set aside in on-base hospitals for this purpose. It would only require a small amount of resources set aside and provide for many of the needs of sexual assault victims, including those of domestic violence. Next, and similar to our housing arrangement prototype, would allow unit commanders to change the unit or shift time of airmen who make restricted reports and request the change. This would also require coordination in order to maintain legality of the restricted reports. Lastly is our prototype to modernize sexual assault training, which we believe will create the most immediate and long-lasting impact. Felicity, over to you.
Yes, so like Jacob said, our main prototype that we're seeking to implement right now is to change the way that the Air Force is implementing SAPR training. So currently, how the Air Force does SAPR training is by having a large group of airmen all in the same room together. Happens once or twice a year over a long block of time, and usually there's a death by PowerPoint. There's a really, really long PowerPoint that's presented. Almost always there's a victim story that's involved, and it's a least effective method according to multiple studies, that the way that we're currently doing training right now. However, how our group wanted to remodel our plan was to have small or unit or subunit size groups, less than an hour, have it bi-monthly. We want to intermediately separate genders, but at the same time do have genders together during some discussions, having it peer-led, mostly by E4s to E6s. As Jake mentioned earlier, also having a discussion-based learning where it's not a lecture, it's a discussion among airmen. Next, you want to utilize scenarios, because many people, or we feel like many airmen, do not understand, for example, the difference between sexual assault versus sexual harassment. Therefore, if we can utilize scenarios and kind of differentiate the two, we can catch sexual harassment much earlier. Next, we have specific monthly and bi-monthly topics. Next, having to discuss recent developments going on within their unit or within the Air Force as a whole. And then also having a rank-off discussion. This means having officers enlisted together so that people can be more comfortable with each other. We don't want this fear of authority kind of attitude going on where people, or mostly enlisted or lower ranking officers, do not feel comfortable talking to their higher up leadership because of this rank. So therefore we want to have a rank off. And why we wanted to do this plan is to make people more comfortable about it and to kind of have this discussion going on so that people can be more comfortable discussing with their peers, the people that they work with and the people that they live with, so we can, in order to reduce the amount of sexual assault. So how we're going to implement this training is first, we want to have these members like create a program that is very engaging, and then also having discussions about the catch program, which is new topics that have recently been implemented by the Air Force. A lot of airmen do not know about many of these programs that are already being implemented. And then also initiate a monitored form of discussion-based education during basic training. And so it's a full program implementing intermixing of all ranks. So therefore, if we started off early in basic training, airmen can get the experience and the training early on before they even go out into their careers in the Air Force. And then part 2 is training the moderators. This requires a course in the Airman Leadership School that teaches how to moderate critical and uncomfortable conversations. Like we said earlier, the people who will be leading this will be E4s to E6s ideally, and therefore we can get this course at Airman Leadership School that they have to go through anyways, that teaches them how to have these conversations. And so we want to emphasize that this is a continuous solution. It doesn't mean that this solution that we're trying to propose and implement is the final solution that will end all sexual assault. That's not the case. This is a solution that lends itself to more solutions. It's less linear than current training because we can adapt it and make it more flexible to the current issues and the current cases going on. And then we would also really like to emphasize that this is more than the training. This is a discussion. This is not a lecture. This is a comfortable discussion that airmen can have with each other in order to reduce the stigma behind reporting and then also therefore reduce the number of sexual assault cases. Are there any questions?
Have you guys proposed this idea up the chain of command and into the SAPR offices and stuff?
So we presented it last semester to General Tudor. He's currently working in A1 in the Pentagon right now. So we have proposed it to him. We tried to work with SAPR with this project, and honestly, the Sapper office was mostly giving us more trouble than being helpful. And so they are aware of our project right now. And this is still in the early stages of development. And so like a couple of us are going to work with A1 over the summer and then continue to work on it within our senior year. And so it's been introduced to members of our training command, but it hasn't really been implemented or anything serious as of yet.
Yeah, sure. No, it's a great idea. It's a tough problem. I mean, they've been trying to crack this one for a while, but that's good. It's good stuff. I think it looked really good. I didn't really have any questions, actually. You kind of really thought it out. So, it's a very good presentation.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, the floor is open for more questions. Otherwise, we can wrap this up. Okay. All right. Well, if nobody has any more questions, I just want to say thank you to all of you for coming and doing this today on your Saturday. I know it was had some trouble going forward, especially communication and like setting up these initial like presentations and scheduling and all that. So I apologize for any of that, but we managed to make it work. And a lot of these presentations will, it doesn't really end here. So because we recorded all of them, and that we're gonna probably most likely make like a library that people will be able to, that weren't able to attend today, you know, be able to go and click on them. Your abstracts are all available for people to read. They'll be compiled into like an abstract and published into an abstract book. Amy Berg from DFRO did one last year, even though the event got canceled, and it was really nice. I think she's going to do that again. So you have that to look forward to, having these videos and presentations published and for the rest of the community access. So thanks again for taking the time and sharing your projects. Really appreciate it. I think there might be still some time for other projects that are going on till 3, I think. So if you wanted to watch other people's, you will be free to do that. But if not, thank you. And I hope you'll enjoy the rest of your Saturday.
Thank you, sir. Have a good day.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Have a good one.
You too.